You're grinding every day. Long hours, no backup, no accountability. That ends now. The Empower Solopreneur Mastermind gives you one simple advantage, a weekly power session that turns isolation into domination. Every Friday morning on Zoom, you'll get real coaching and real feedback to make real moves. Join a group of driven professionals in a program designed for solopreneurs and people working at home. Stop getting stuck. Start scaling. Seats are limited. Lock in yours today at modernobserver.com/empower-mastermind.
We are lighting the candle, a world that works. Did that sound authoritative? I'm pretty sure that's who we are today, although there's just so much going on. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Bill Correll. I'm the host with you. And I'm here. I've got the pleasure of having my co-host or co-hostess, depending on how you like to say it, Jan Jeremiah. And the two of us every week, we get together and I guess we're kind of crackpots. We think that talking about things and modeling different types of behaviors and experiences might be useful to you. So I think with that in mind, the two of us are here yet again today. And we've just completed a really lovely Thanksgiving holiday. And I don't know for sure how yours was, Jan, but mine was phenomenal. It was very intimate, just my wonderful wife and me. And she outdid herself this year. She spent probably 5 hours preparing a meal for the two of us, and she dolled up every recipe. We had sweet potatoes and mashed potatoes with the skins because she knows I like to have the skins mashed in with the potatoes. She put seasoning in them. They were all unbelievable. My little sister would say they were to die for, okay? And then she made a new dressing or stuffing, as a lot of people call it. And she put blueberries, or actually cranberries in it. Cran raisins is what it was. Phenomenal taste. If you've never done that, you should try it. And then she did this way of stuffing the skin underneath the turkey breast. That we didn't have a whole turkey. We just had an 8-pound breast. And she put all of these herbs and spices and butter and all. It made the skin crackling. And it was just so flavorful and tasty if you like that sort of thing. And I do know that some of you are not really into meat as much, but I am a devout meatitarian, and that's what I do a lot of. So, it just hit me in all the right spots. And then the pecan pie afterwards, which is kind of her trademark for Thanksgiving. Got started probably, 40 years ago when her mother used to make me a special pecan pie. This is Bill's pecan pie every single Thanksgiving. So that's my stream of consciousness on how Thanksgiving was for me, Jan. How was it for you?
It was quiet. I spent quite a lot of time um visiting with my niece and her new baby, well, 2.5 month old.
Wow.
So I went by multiple times because they're fairly close. So I saw the baby on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And just, even when she's sleeping or whatever, but I think I was very intrigued. And I just spoke about this on another meeting. I was very intrigued and kind of like I was like an observer looking at her and thinking to myself, because you can very clearly see her personality and her and everything. And just, I guess we were talking about it in this conversation because it was to me very obvious how much we lose that, or a lot of people lose that, like that sort of the same essence they were when they were a child. I think it's always there, but I think it gets masked and then marred and kind of manipulated. And, if it, people conform or whatever, and really that's still there. and connecting with that. And so we were talking about that, but it was like, as I looked at her, I thought, oh my gosh, it's so obvious who she is, and yeah. And so that was like kind of a beautiful, beautiful thing as I got to see her multiple times. It's like, and on Saturday, she was looking at me and we were like, she's very much her own person. And it's kind of like, it's very funny because if you talk to her and if you talk to her and she's just not in the mood, she just starts to cry. She wants to just don't look at her. And she's like, and so she was very engaged. She's looking at me and she was smiling and so yeah.
It's funny at that age, their vocabulary is smiling and cooing or crying. And their activities are limited as well, but we won't talk about those. Some of them are off-putting, but a lot of them are just a whole lot of fun, especially when they start gripping and they can grab your finger.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I know what you're saying, that when you look into a baby's eyes, there's definitely thought going on in there. It's not organized in the way that we would think of thinking because they're not burdened with the language that we have to think in. And it's more related, I think, to just pure emotion and pure response to their situation and stimulation.
Absolutely. Because really, what do you think about? What are everything is about their basic needs. Like, whether they're, hungry, thirsty, you know, whether the temperature is too cold, warm, and connection, love. I mean, that's basically their whole world. Everything else is not applicable, is not there. And so it's the very basic of our own needs. And if I think were to look at the very basic of our own needs in any given situation, then we get to sit there and say, okay, well, am I safe? Like really safe. Like if I'm not worried about something because it happened to me in the past, in this moment, am I safe?
Right.
Am I warm? Am I nourished? You know, do I have people around me that love me? Beings around me that love me and I love back. And then you realize that, everything else is not that important.
It's an interesting thought. We have a baby's just going to let you know what they're responding to, and a positive emotion or whatever that is. I think they're all positive. I'm reminded of a Joni Mitchell lyric where she wrote, laughing and crying, they're the same release. And they say that often, that when somebody doesn't, when you're under stress, there's two things you can do. You can laugh or you can cry. The crying tends to be the younger response, the one that's not quite so developed and doesn't have a lot of logic in that particular area of his response. But babies, I don't know, I learn a lot from children. And I don't know why this is, Jan, but it just seems to me like dogs and kids love me. When I show up in the room, maybe it's because I start off with a smile and I kind of get down on their level, whether it's a dog or a little kid. But if I told you this story before, don't stop me because I love telling this story. I've got a friend who is down in West Coast, Florida, and we've been friends on Facebook for a long time. So I made a long trip down there. I was down there for 3 weeks, cut it short because I had to come back to Connecticut for something. And I spent 2 days with this gal going around looking at real estate and everything in Punta Gorda. And she had a 4-year-old granddaughter who was precocious as all get out. And when I first met this little girl, I'm at the bottom of the stairs. You have to go upstairs, or they actually had a small elevator, inside to take you up to the second floor. But she comes down. When she gets to like 4 steps from the bottom, she just leaps into my arms. Never seen her before. And I know, I kid you not. I mean, we bonded in that moment. She looked up at me and she said, I love you. And I just thought to myself, that's the most perfect child response I can remember hearing in a very, very long time. And I need more of that in my life. I won't be having any grandchildren that age. I think both of my kids are done, and now my grands are in their teens. But I think the point is that there was something that got created there. I don't know if she thought it was, but there was just like an immediate unspoken trust. I don't, or maybe she's just good at jumping off the fourth step at whatever happens to be there. But her grandmother is go, oh my God, Katiana, what are you doing? And we're both hysterical laughing. But
Hmm. But I think there's something, I've always, if you look at, different, I've always had a strong connection to animals, always.
oh yeah,
From the time I was, and would go up to anything. Like, I mean, I was just totally enthralled, enamored. Um, and almost, contrary to like my wisdom now in some ways, almost fearless when it came to, things, but, not reptiles, like anything furry was gonna get my attention, not reptiles. But it's very interesting because I think that now I have a true appreciation that I didn't have for kids at a younger age. Like as an adult, I think that and reaching a certain age, because I don't know if that I was always like that with kids. But now very much so over like the past, I don't know, let's say 10 years or so.
yeah,
I have a really and I love talking to kids because I love to hear the way they think.
yes.
Um, I love to be around that kind of imagination and creativity. I might have also shared this story. I remember my one of my nephews is now in his 20s. When I took him on his first plane trip, we went to visit my parents in Florida. He's like 10 years old, and he's never been on a plane before. So we get on the plane, and every single thing was amazing, was so exciting. And he's asking me 1,000 questions. And it was that inquisitive curiosity of like and awe all wrapped up into one
Yeah.
of like stuff that we so take for granted. Like, oh my gosh, look at the air vent. And oh my gosh, that button calls the flight attendant and turns on the light. Like, I mean, it was like pure amazement to him. And I think actually spending that time with him, I remember, and seeing it through his eyes and having him talk to me about it was such a gift. Because I think, in those moments, it's like you're forever changed because you realize I can go through life like that. Like,
Yes.
I can go through life with sheer amazement every day. The fact that I turn on a faucet and water comes out. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
It's we can train ourselves to do that. I mean, it's not something that really comes naturally to an adult, but when you take the time to celebrate simplicity and the awe that's in every little small moment, and it can start with just taking an object. We've talked about this before that you take for granted in your room and then distinguish the particles that make it up, and the way the light hits it, or if there's a smell or something like that. And I mean, that's what I hear you saying. And you also remind me of, we were really fortunate because my daughter was a big deal for her, especially in the early years, that she came back here once or twice a year, and we'd all get together on our back deck. We have a big back deck that holds about 40 or 50 people if we needed to. And so the first time Lincoln was here, she was pregnant with him, and the older brother Jackson was about one and a half. So the next time Lincoln comes, he's just had his third birthday, and we go down into the backyard. I was going to go get a ball out of the shed or something like that, and it was actually built as a garage in like 1907 or something like that. We've got a big old red barn that's on the property. So we go outside, and he looks up at the main house, and he looks at me and he says, "Grandpa, is that your house?" And I said, yes, Lincoln, that's my house. He said, Grandpa, I love your house. So we started walking down the hill and we go by the garage. I mean, at the barn. And he looks at the barn and he looks at me and says, Grandpa, is that your house too? And I said, yes, Lincoln, that's my house too. He said, Grandpa, I love your house. So then we get a little bit further down, and now here's the old garage, with cedar shake shingles around it, and you know, Grandpa, is that your house too? I said, yes, Lincoln, that's my house. He said, Grandpa, I love all your houses. I mean, the brilliance of a 3-year-old. I mean, we've lived here, 40 years by then, or 35 anyway. Long story short, he was introducing me to what's kind of a cool thing in the world, but we take it for granted because we walk by it every single day.
Hmm.
Go get the riding lawnmower out or something like that, but it's no big deal.
Right. And, as you were telling the house story, my parents' old house in the basement, I lived there when I was a teenager. The people who had owned it previously, like every part of the basement was kind of like where the laundry room was. They had made into like a little house. They had put up a door. There was a window with a window box. It had shingles. And so when my nieces and nephews were young, we used to tell them that, like the three little pigs lived in those houses or whatever. So, the same kind of thing where they would go down and there were like three houses down in the basement that were like individualized. So as you were telling that story, it reminded me of we were talking about it the other day when I was with my brothers. But I think you're right. I think we can look at the things that are in our environment or even just and refresh them. I mean, the other thing is just I do this sometimes is if you take, let's say you always take a walk and you go in the same direction, actually reverse the direction because the light hits differently. When I used to hike a lot, I used to do that if it was a circle where I'd find myself going and doing the circle in the same direction for a period of time. And then all of a sudden I would say, well, maybe I should go in the other direction, for a while because you see different things. The light hits, the way the forest is. I was driving back on one of the local streets and there's a reservoir near me. And usually you can't see it because the trees are too dense. And all of a sudden, the way the sun was hitting and the way the light, and I looked over and I was like, oh my gosh, I can see the water. It's always there,
Right.
but it's covered up a lot of the year.
You know, I love that you're saying that because we live 2 blocks from the North Campus at Eastern Connecticut State University. And we look across, over the years as different buildings were being built over there. Can't see them at all where the trees have leaves on because there's a city block and at least 2 people's properties with homes on them and then trees and what have you. But when the leaves fall off, you can actually look right straight through the trees. That's actually where the sun rises in the morning. It is due east. And there's a clock tower on the North Campus that has this big, beautiful white face on it. And we can see it clearly through the trees. But when spring comes and the leaves come back out, then it's not there anymore. So it's almost like after all these years, I think that's been there 20 years now. It seems like maybe less, but it's like saying hi to an old friend again for a minute. But then it's a harbinger of it's going to be snowing pretty soon. And so the charm loses, it kind of glosses over pretty quickly.
Pretty quickly. I know that. But when I was doing a lot of hiking and now, I mean, it's mainly walking. I don't hike as much lately. But it's, there is some sort of refreshing quality that happens in the winter. And I used to love winter hiking.
Yes.
I mean, if it snowed, then I would just snowshoe at the time. But um, originally, it was so nice because you really did get a totally different view. It was totally different perspective because, it was like the leaves were on the trees and it was so dense you couldn't see anything
Right.
to having it be a little bit more sparse. I was talking with one of my students this morning after class, and we were talking about the evergreens in contrast to like a lot of the trees that lose their leaves and are just bare, and just a contrast between the two. I mean, I love evergreens and just that deep forest green, like that just kind of pops up in between that kind of just the gray bark or the bark that's basically only showing that and sky.
Lovely. I'm just remembering when I was a kid, we lived in a place down in Ledyard, and it was a nice um, bedroom development with about 60 or 70 homes in it. And the neat part of it is that I would say 80% of the homes were families that had children, almost all of which were somewhere between, kindergarten and a few people had kids that were in high school, but most of us, we were in grammar school. And we developed all these really cool places, in the woods to go to explore. It was almost like, the Tolkien's Seven Kingdoms or something like that. There's a place where there's all of these pine trees with a bed of pine straw, pine straw on the ground, and you could crawl underneath there, and you could look like 150 feet all the way to the other end. Nothing could grow there because no light got down, and it was like suddenly somebody put a big old damper, and it was quiet, amazingly quiet. So there was that, and then we had a little kind of a rock um, that jumped out of the ground on the side of a hill, which we called Monkey's Ledge, and it had these vines that we could actually swing on until we swung on them too much and they broke, and that wasn't good. And there was an old home that was out by the reservoir. We had to walk almost a mile and a half to get to that one, but it was vacant. We called it the Hermit's House. And so there were all these really different places that each of us took turns showing some new person who moved into the neighborhood, all these cool places that we could go to. But I think, they were fantasy places where we played different games and we talked about what we were going to be when we grew up, or we just sat around and made up stories to tell each other. And there was one time, I want you to, just think about this for a second. One of the older, more sophisticated kids, I think they were in like fourth or fifth grade. Uh, they were talking about, about who was really sexy. And I mean, like all the rest of us are like, wow, I'm going to learn something here. And so they're talking about, the Queen of England, man, she is really sexy, or it wasn't Marilyn Monroe or Liz Taylor or something like that. It was, this kind of really famous people. And they didn't know what they were talking about, that they just sounded so sophisticated to us.
Well, it's always fun when you talk to kids about that kind of stuff because, just or who they perceive as, I think adult figures and what their significance is. And, even if it's local people, like to them, it's like local kids TV at the time. Like those were really famous people.
Yeah.
Really famous people. I remember one of the biggest disappointments as a kid. I went on some local kids TV show, and in the TV show, the backdrop for like where the kids used to sit was stone. And I thought, oh, okay, I didn't have stones like that in my house. It was like big, big stones. And I thought, okay, this is kind of cool. And I remember sitting in the bleachers and putting my hand back, and they were plastic. And I was so disappointed. I was like, it was like this a bursting of a bubble, kind of thing. Because they made it look like you were like in a range, like it was like, like out in the woods, and it was like a log cabin kind of thing with a stone fireplace and everything. And I'm sitting there going, it's just plastic.
What a
But
letdown.
what a letdown. But yeah, I mean, I think that there is something about just people, it's like, and we were talking about my nieces and nephews and my brother who has like many grandchildren, is how like he is with them and how they are with him. I mean, they absolutely adore him. And it's so much fun for me to watch because it's so, in a way, not my brother's, in a lot of ways, isn't how I ever even saw my brother in that form either. Because I think we put on this image of being quote unquote adults. And not often do we let our hair down, so to speak, or our beard down in in your case,
Yeah, exactly.
and my long hair. But do we let ourselves be, that kind of like where we are when we're with kids?
Yeah, and I think the making believe, um, and I still remember every time we would watch The Wizard of Oz. The next day, we would run around the school playground, and of course, somebody would have to be the Wicked Witch, and somebody would have to be, the Scarecrow, and somebody would, and so on and so on. But I always wanted to be the flying monkey. That was my favorite thing to be, and so that gave me all the power because I used to be able to catch these guys and then carry them back to the witch. And life was just all about having fun. And then we started learning organized games. It went away from dodgeball, which every school that I went to in Connecticut always had a big old wall made out of bricks that the teacher or somebody else would throw the ball, and they never really threw it all that hard back in those days. But the kids, especially when we got bigger, that's when we really started winging it. And it was a big red rubber ball. I'm sure everybody remembers what those looked like, and they had a textured pattern on the outside of them. And when you kicked them, they would go, you know, and then they made them in different sizes. But the one that was the most fun was what we used to call the boom chick ball. It was only about 4 or 5 inches in diameter, and we loved winging that at each other. And if you get hit by that, it didn't hurt, but it was kind of humiliating because you can't get out of the way of that thing. What's wrong with you? Just all of the made up invented things that we used to do because we could. The guns made out of a piece of wood or a stick that we found on the ground. And then the gun sounds, like in my neighborhood, we're playing, my younger brother, his sound was cow, 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 cow when he was shooting. And the other one was how ga, 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 and everybody had their own noise that they made when they were shooting. Another guy was Buddha, 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 because he had a machine gun. So I don't know. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about those early days running around like our side yard was treed, and it was so much fun to play in. And it was the biggest yard in the neighborhood, so everybody gathered there. Plus we had 6 kids, so we all had friends, and they all seemed to come over to our house.
Hmm. I just remember that behind our house we had woods, and so we would just go exploring, and every day in the backyard. We had a fairly big yard too, so we lived on in the beginning when I was really little, we lived on a dead end. So it was, it was bikes basically. Every different every kind of variation of a bike.
Oh yeah.
So it was a big bike street, and it was a really huge hill, and it was actually amazing for sledding. And so at that time it was like winter was so much fun. I just remember it would take you about 2 minutes, like, however long to get down. And then you had to take the sled and trek back up to like go to the top so you could go down again. And how much of my life I spent going, you spend going up these hills just for that few seconds of like pure adrenaline rush of going down that snowy hill. But
Yeah.
yeah, fond memories.
So through the eyes of a child, it's there's a lot been written about that. It's a really well covered subject in literature and poetry. And Moody Blues had a really great song on one of their albums, and I can't remember. It might have been To Our Children's Children, or however many children's there were, or On the Threshold of a Dream, but what I really liked about that whole notion is I can never know what it's like to be you. I can never know what it's like to be a child who's near me. I can only know what I remember it was like for me to be a child. And now these days, I don't know if I'm remembering what happened when I was a child or the stories I've told hundreds and hundreds of times since I was actually that age. Because it's been a long time for me since I was 5 years old. But there are memories that I have that are so vivid. And sometimes I just kind of wonder, is that what really happened? Or was that just my perception and memory and thoughts afterwards that, keep recurring. And the more you say something, the more that's what happened, right?
Yeah, I think what I think about most about that time is like as I talk to people and like we're now and we're having, let's say, this conversation, it's another way in which to relate to other people
Yeah.
and for them to relate to us. Because, you tell that story about your grandson and him looking at the houses like, oh my gosh, grandpa. And I can I can feel what that feels like. And so I think that that's the gift because it kind of takes us outside of our normal whatever that we carry, into every conversation, our normal armor, let's say,
Yeah.
or our normal clothing that we put on when we're in a particular situation with particular people or not at all, or just people in general, people we don't know.
Yeah.
I think it takes us back to a time when so much of what we consider important was not really that important. Wasn't important at all. Like, kids have a different idea of what important is, obviously. And I'm not saying it's not, there are times when, the whole idea of fitting in and not fitting in. But I think that when we go back to those memories of like, you know, I mean, one of my favorite things I remember was riding my bike in the rain. Like, rain didn't matter.
Right.
It was like, how many puddles could you go through?
Absolutely.
You know?
And we didn't really notice what a mess we were until we got into the house and it was all over the kitchen floor. And
Yeah.
then
And then going upstairs to like take a bath or shower and the water running brown because you were so dirty.
absolutely. It still didn't get it right. That wasn't me. But I'll tell you what, my mom would wash the kitchen floor and waxed it very frequently back in those days, back when she wasn't working. And it was a capital offense to walk in there and get her floor dirty. You know,
Right.
it was
You're talking to someone who's, I mean, my mother's German, and so meticulous in cleanliness was taken to a whole new level. It was taken to a level, but and my family, family stories, like extended family stories about cleaning, but it's very. But I think that it makes everybody so much more like it brings us back to realize how much we're the same and how, another way in which we're all the same.
absolutely.
And so I think that that's why I love these kind of like thinking about going back to when you're children because
Well, there's another kind of a neat thing that happens. I don't see it with a lot of people, but when my dad hit a particular age, I just noticed it more in him, and we weren't seeing him as frequently as we had, maybe 5 years before. But it just seemed like every time we got together, the first 25 minutes was him telling exactly the same stories. And, I was riding home with my wife at one point, and she said, that drives me crazy. And I said, it used to drive me crazy too. And I thought to myself, he's trying his best to break the ice. And he's not retelling stories to give us information. He's telling stories that he loves to tell. And I guess the most generous thing we can do in that circumstance is just to be authentically listening for the first time, each time we hear the same story. And so it's not any different than my 3-year-old grandson. My dad was also just trying to connect and relate. And he told the things that he had probably got a good rise out of with somebody, and they either laughed or had some kind of a strong reaction. So those were the stories we got to hear over and over again. And the funny part of it is that in the 1990s, I went through the Landmark Forum, and there was a woman, Joni McNeil, who was not the leader or anything, but she came up to do a demonstration, and she was talking about how you feel about your mate, and or your mom or your dad, and she said, if you haven't gone through a separation with somebody, you'll probably not understand what I'm talking about. But those things that they do that annoy you right now, especially if they pass along, you'll treasure those. Like those were the human moments. That's when they were real, when they weren't putting on or affecting something. So I've always thought about that. And when people say, I just wish I could have 5 more minutes with my dad, I think for me it would be to hear him tell those animated stories, and just get into it, the presentation. He was performing, and by golly, that was a big deal for him. And it was kind of fun for me too. So my wife and I conspired. So we said, we're gonna egg him on, when he starts to tell the story, and then we go, yeah, right? And then what happened? Like we've never heard it before. And you know what? If he caught on to what we were doing, he never let it slip. He never like the jig was never up. Let's put it that way. We all conspired to create this memorable moment with each other as if it had never been said before, but it wasn't what had been said before. Each time it was new energy, new love, new whatever it was. And I think that's one of the neat things that we have with people that we love, and animals too. There's all those kinds of things that we start to take for granted, or we complain about how much trouble it is to clean the cat box. And please, Boo, would you try to have a better aim, or whatever. But yeah, she said that you're going to miss that. That's going to be something you treasure.
hmm I do think that that's what ends up happening.
Yeah.
I mean, because, you know, so many of those things are basically who people are. So, or that being, and sometimes it's the, missing of a litter box or the bad aim. And sometimes it's I've been thinking about that a lot lately with Tonka and the fact that, basically, I sleep with him and he doesn't sleep with me. Because lately he takes up a lot of my side of the bed. I end up sleeping in like one little part, even though we have a fairly big bed. But it's really interesting because like now in the mornings when I get up and he's there, and I think to myself, like, oh my gosh, like I love the fact that he's there and he's laying there. And, in the mornings, I will take my coffee I don't drink coffee. I'll take my tea and, or something hot to drink. And I go back and I sit up and I might like get online or just meditate. And he's laying there next to me. Nothing better in my book, like nothing absolutely better. And so I know that I'm going to miss that. Like, and the thought of it is like, my mother's like, don't think about it. And I'm like, done too much of this work to really kind of live in denial. So I'm just like, I've got to treasure this. Like, it's almost like I'm like reminding myself, remember what this is like, value it, treasure it, because eventually, it's going to be different. Not bad, but just different.
Absolutely. So I was telling Janet, my wife, for those of you who are at home and don't know, I stopped over at Jan's house a couple weeks ago, and we did some stuff. And the entire time I was there, Tonka was so attentive and so wonderful, and to the point where he really just had to be touching me all the time. The silly dog. So I was trying to describe what Tonka looks like to her. She's a dog person. If I'd have known the breed or anything close to it, I could have at least gotten her close to a visual. And how do you describe Tonka and what kind of a breed he is?
Well, genetically, I don't know. I've always thought he was part black lab. And then he has boots, so people have always said his siblings looked a lot like border collies.
Yep.
So, yeah, so border collie, but he's built like a greyhound. Like he's very thin and has a very very narrow, like he has the body of a greyhound. And years ago when I had a dog trainer behaviorist that I was working with him, he always said I really think he's part greyhound
Yeah.
or some sort of race dog because he has that build,
Yep.
is really long legs. Like he's
Yeah.
very tall for a dog. So, but through the years, like I've had people stop me, like would be driving by and stop and say, "Oh my gosh, he's beautiful."
He
'Cause-
is.
And, and yeah, I've always thought of him as being years ago. I had somebody who took this photo and it's one of the best photos of him. And my mother saying to me, you know, he really should have been a model. Myself, such a grandmother thing to say,
Yep.
so it makes me laugh. But yeah, he is very handsome. And so, yeah, he's still so white, like his belly and his boots are still white, even though he's quite old. So they have those have really stayed. Yeah, but yes.
Yeah. At home, in terms of, I identified him as part greyhound as well. He has the rear legs, hips, and the smaller tapering belly, and the bigger chest with large lungs. And those powerful front legs to really be a sprinter. And the neat part of it, of all of that is I don't think he really, I don't think it would ever cross his mind to, re- I don't know many animals that have a good feel for their size, if you will. Okay. The big dogs that think they belong in your lap, and, I mean, you get, and the ones who are, of course you want me to be checking you out and nudging you and sniffing you and maybe drooling a little bit on your pant leg or whatever it is. But, you know, we're not used to that over here. And so for me, it was kind of special. I could imagine somebody else who sees him frequently, might get a little bit annoyed by how much, like, can you be less needy for 30 seconds?
Yeah. Could you right?
Yeah.
But he is usually like that with people because it's we get busy or whatever and we're like, okay, well, I'd love to pet you, but I really have things to do right now.
Yeah. We booked my biz for this thing. Yeah.
That's right. But in general, he's like that with a lot of people. And he's even like that when we go out for a walk. Like he'll go up to people and he'll nudge them to pet them. And he was really not when he was younger, he was not like that as much.
Right.
He was much more aloof. And eh, and I think for him, he's very sound sensitive. So he's not and doesn't respond well to frenetic energy. So he doesn't respond well to kids that are running around. Like he doesn't know what to do with that. And he's the same way. And I have a neighbor that has a fairly young dog that's super hyper. And it's kind of he's for 5 seconds and then he'll be like, okay, I've had enough. We can go now. I don't need to be around this little thing that's going, this puppy that's not that's so energetic anymore. And that's why when people ask me, they're like, are you going to get another dog? And I'll be like, not now. I would not it would just not be good for him at this point. But yeah, yeah, they are funny and they too have personalities big time.
Incredibly so.
I I was on this morning with my student and she has this beautiful Tonkinese. So it looks a lot like a Siamese,
Yep.
who's beautiful. And, so I guess she picked her up to come and say hello to me. And so, but then all of a sudden she put her down and she's like, and the tail was flicking, or whatever. And we were talking about, that cat personality of
Oh yeah.
touch me on my terms when I'm ready, and I said, she's giving me the look. And I said, yes, she's giving you the look why did you just bother me? How dare you bother me?
Reminds me of going to a friend's house a neighbor down the street. They got a new Siamese cat, and it wasn't a kitten. It was actually a probably 3 or 4 year old cat, and it hopped up on the back of the uh, sofa that we were sitting on. So, being a wise, whatever kid, I started making meowing sounds at it. And my friend's mother said, "Bill, I wouldn't do that." And I said, "Really? No, he likes to fight. He will carve your face up. And I'll be darned if he didn't cock his head to one side and then, lunge at me, you know? So that didn't work. I was trying to be cool and talk to the cat in cat language, and it just wouldn't have any of it.
Well, it's always funny. It was always funny to me when I could when I could meow, my cats would meow back.
Yeah.
And I knew exactly the tone to do and the intonation and to get them and whatever. My last dog wasn't a barker, was a big talker. Like it would be like roar, 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 like conversations. I mean, it would, and she used to sing. Tonka's a barker, like he barks.
Yeah.
Doesn't talk much. Every now and then when he wants food or something and when he gets all excited, he'll be like, roar, 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 like he gets excited, but he doesn't bark. But in general, my last dog was a real talker. And it was just funny. It's like, but they're all different. And that was one of the wisest things that I had a friend at the time when my last dog, Casey, died. And she said, just remember, like, don't go out looking for her because they're unique. You're not going to find another one of her.
Yeah.
And that was just so wise. I mean, I had pets, but not, multiple pets through just enough. And it was just a really great thing to say because I didn't go out looking for her. I went out looking for another dog at the time.
Amazing. So the gal who cuts my hair, she's been cutting it since 1984. I think she was 7 or 8 years old when she started. Like,
I'm sure I'm sure she's glad you're saying that, Bill.
yeah, I don't know if she listens to our podcast, but I should tell her I'm plugging her dog Walter. He said he's picked up a new habit. He's now a talker as well, but it doesn't sound happy. It sounds like he's growling, but I really think what it is the vibration makes him feel good, and he's like, and I said, what's up with that? He sounds like he's grousing. She said, nah, he's just talking. I mean, he would never hurt a flea anyway,
Yeah.
I mean, if he was infested with them, he'd probably just shake or whatever, but to look at this dog who weighs 140 pounds, when he starts talking low like that, it usually precedes something not good.
I was going to say, what kind of dog is it?
It is a short-haired golden retriever.
Oh, wow.
It's a lab, whatever. Broad head, broad body, big dog.
Yeah, that is.
But he still thinks he's a 5-pound pup too.
Well, it's always used to be funny when Tonka would lay in bed and get on top of me. And I'd be like, buddy, you're too big for that, but then you get the small dogs that have my friend had this very, very, I want to say adorable, but I mean, it was so, it was so kind of awkward and kind of bizarre looking that he was cute, who was adorable. And he was actually a Chihuahua poodle, not planned, not like a designer breed, but just that was, and very much was like a small dog in a large body and really had the attitude of people would come and delivery people, and Rue would be at the top of her sofa because it was next to the window, and he would jump up and be on the top, and it would be like, and so it was always so funny. It was like, you tell him, Rue,
Yeah.
all 5 pounds of you.
Amazing.
But
Bending the world to their will.
oh, yes. Yes. But I think there's just something, and I know, we might have talked, but there's something very special about also growing up or being around animals because they have this, I think it's the unconditional love that they show. And like we talk about basic needs, like what's their, what's their play, sleep, eat, go to the bathroom. I mean, love. I mean, doesn't like that's it.
Pretty simple, really.
Right. Very simple.
Above and beyond that, I think the play part is what we get the most enjoyment out of. Or when they're asleep. I mean, there's something really very calming about a sleeping animal. That's just completely vulnerable, especially when they start dreaming and the head bobs a little bit and the feet start going a little jumpy. We always used to say Cookie is chasing a rabbit.
Yeah, either that or yeah. I always think Tonka's running because that's in his mind. That's what he's doing. He's running.
So it occurs to me we don't have a lot of time left to talk today, but we're heading, we're in that period of time in between Thanksgiving and some other really special holidays for people coming up here. I don't know for sure when Hanukkah is this year, but Christmas is on the same date every year. But this time typically seems to go by very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of committed to finding a way to slow the days down a little bit. I have the neat, it's unique for me, but I have time abundance at the moment. So I'm more than interested in figuring out how each day is going to be distinct. So they don't all run together and now suddenly 2 weeks has gone by. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm open to suggestions on that. And I would like to know how other people, when you do get time to have a little bit of leisure, especially if you're used to very long days and being occupied for almost all the time that you're awake doing something, what do people do to sort of savor the moment and enjoy the day and have each day be a little bit special in and of itself?
Yeah, I do. I think that's a great question, first of all. And the word that when you were describing and I was thinking about it, the word savor was the first word I thought of.
Yeah.
And I think it's that same idea, savoring of being present. Because I think that's so much of my day. I mean, I can speak from personal experience where you're preoccupied and thinking of something else that you're not present for what you're doing. Like things, you just move along and then all of a sudden you're like, your cup is empty and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even remember drinking that tea, but it's empty. And I think there is this idea of can we be present? Because I think when you're present, one is the day seems more full. You're more likely to identify unique things about the day.
Yes.
Like it's like if you take a notice if you look outside, because I have a really great view right now. I'm looking out and I'm like, oh, look, like very different than yesterday, where in the morning it was kind of clear, but the clouds were really interesting. And so I'm like, oh, okay. And so it makes me notice, okay, different day, like different, and so I think that and, filling it up with, and not in a bad way, filling it up like you're trying to keep yourself busy, but, filling it up with unique experiences, with unique things, whether that be with other people or, on your own.
Right.
Of just like, going and taking a day trip somewhere or, or going somewhere local that you haven't been in a while so that there's a specialness to the day where it doesn't run into the next.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about, I've got a friend who lives over in Newport. I reached out to her this morning. I thought maybe I'd take a run over and spend a day or two with her. What people don't know is this is the busiest season of the year for my wife. She is a rural poster postal carrier. So she's on call every single day for the next day. And as a result of that, she never knows, but we're pretty sure if we make plans, she'll get called in. That just seems to be how it goes. So I just thought I would, take the opportunity to go the direction of how things are going and go see my friend Linda. And when I reached out to her this morning and I asked her a particular question, about 5 minutes goes by and she says, "How dare you be listening to my thoughts?" And I said, "Well, you know me." And she said, "I want you to stop that." And I said, "I couldn't if I tried." And she said, "Yep, that's what I love you for." So I don't know. She's in a process of swapping homes with her daughter. She owns both of them, and her daughter needs a smaller place rather than a bigger place. And Linda, is not interested in making money from somebody outside the family, but she just really wants to make sure the houses are lived in and being well taken care of. So she said, "I'm in the process of moving." And so I didn't even ask her if she wanted to get together. So I'll wait until she lets me know she's done. But in the meantime, everyone else in the world is at risk because I'm looking for you.
Looking for you.
But I love your idea and I'm going to take you up on that. I'm going to do some day trips. So here we are. It seems like our time together increases to warp speed, especially with certain conversations, but it's always a tremendous amount of enjoyment for me to hang out with you, Jan, and I appreciate you.
I appreciate you, Bill.
At the end of whatever goes on the daily life, the summary of all the things that are working and not working and all the conversations with the various people, we have this special time carved out for each other pretty much on a weekly basis to just hang out and chat.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not going to have a podcast, the rest of you might want to consider just like doing this and having a regular coffee get together with somebody. I know my mom used to really enjoy doing long distance telephone calls to her sisters. But I think what's going on in the world right now, that we don't have to talk about that because it's really not interesting, is it? I think the things that are far more interesting is sharing our human journeys with each other and really being mindful of like really being appropriate to the circumstances in terms of whatever our state of mind is, whatever things we're going through in life, we're never coming this way again. No two days in a history, or even if you try to do the same things, they're just never the same. So it's lovely to kind of hang out and celebrate the beauty of each day with you when we get together and we talk for a little while.
Oh, yes, it is. Just it's nice to have these conversations and to be able to reflect and not only think about, I think we so often, we obviously, I think as people think about it, especially on a podcast, like what are the listeners, about the listener. And obviously that's a huge part of it. But it's nice when you have conversations and somehow, like you always say, you get goosebumps. It's like it influences you in some way just by bringing it to your attention. You're like, oh, and it reminds you. I always say that in my classes, when I speak, I'm not only speaking for my students, I'm speaking for myself.
You have to. I mean, life is not telling other people how they should feel. I think
Right.
a lot of times you're modeling how you are truly authentically feeling right now and giving them the permission to explore it or to name it in whatever way that they will. And if there's somebody around who cares, they can share it with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that just reminds me of the definition of human transformation is it occurs at that point where even those delivering transformation are themselves transformed.
That's right.
So if you're a real high school teacher and you're lecturing all day long and no difference is being made with you, pretty sure not a lot of difference is being made in the rest of the class with all those kids. However, when you go home every single day and go, wow, what we built together today, best day ever,
Mm-hmm.
that's the impetus for getting out of bed, one more time. One last little story. I watched an amazing video over the weekend. It had to do with a charter school in Harlem. And this charter school is, I don't know how many kids they actually can have there, but they have thousands that show up for a lottery every single year. These kids are typically performing at least 1 to 2 grade levels higher than public school. They have a graduation rate that is 20 to 40% higher than all of the public schools. They perform better on all of the mastery tests, gap tests, SATs, all that good stuff. And they also have a graduation rate that is very few don't graduate from high school. And of that, about 85% go to college. And in many cases, they've earned a scholarship. So the whole show was about, if this seems to be working, why are they shutting these schools down in New York City? And what it really came down to was just an authentic look at what would the motivation be to close a school that is doing really so well for the kids. It's not designed to do well for the teachers. They typically work longer hours. They typically get less in benefits and pay. And they have turnover, but they typically have people who stay there a lot longer because they just love that process of turning third graders into successful fourth graders. So it was pretty moving to me. It kind of dashed all of the stereotypes, because kids from the inner city are not supposed to do well in school. That's why they don't teach them to do well. And I mean, the moral side of that I took away was something can change if people are willing to step back and be unreasonable with it for a little while. But you can't keep, all of the constituents who are not children going through the school system happy and deliver that kind of excellence and product to the kids. And I only bring that up because it's true in the workforce at companies. It's true in the community. And if we all behaved that way, like we expected everyone to prosper and be successful, the way we do some of our family and friends, right? We just know they're going to be something special when they're done. And if we really had that expectation for each other, there wouldn't be any need for all the scarcity mentality.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it made me curious about the show. When that video,
Yep.
and trying to look for, because I think we see it a lot. I mean, I think, I don't know, I think we see it in the world a lot.
Yeah.
Where, things are changed because, and usually, I mean, I don't want to be negative, but I think a lot of it comes down to money and, and what's faster and easier and easier to make into a process, like where there's one process that fits the majority. And a lot of times, I think important things are compromised. I look at it in products. I mean, it's very much easier to chemically synthesize something than it is to grow a plant, because, if you grow a plant, you have to be worried about the elements, and usually it's labor, it's materials or whatever. If you chemically synthesize it, can control for almost everything. So the productivity or the product in the end is going to be uniform, the same. You don't have, and so I think, but you also lose that natural essence. And I think we see it in children. You see it's no different. You see it in children. You see it in every avenue of life.
I agree. And I bring this up because we've been talking about children for the last hour.
Hmm.
And what's on the table here, I'm not going to make this into a right and wrong political discussion, but in a situation, and I've used the word but a lot because it negates everything that I said before the word. So I'm using but here in a powerful sense. The establishment is resistant to doing this because it means some people have to give something up. And in many cases, maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe what needs to be transformed is the notion of what the missions of our school systems actually are and who should be receiving the greatest benefit from this educational experience. I think with that said, I will put it on my list to get you a link to the YouTube video. It's a John Stossel reporting thing, which I enjoy watching this stuff because he's usually down the middle of the road. And if he's a devil's advocate, he's usually a devil's advocate for for the system, for what they're going against, and isn't this true and isn't that true? But I think the bottom line is that you watch people glowingly talk about their experience with these kids.
Hmm.
I've talked to you about the New Orleans Catholic school where all those girls show up in the 3rd grade, and not most of them, they all graduate, and 95% of them go to college with some sort of a scholarship.
I mean, I think you see it I mean, it was the environment I grew up in. I mean, everybody, but I think that I look at it as looking much more at the individual child. Like, not every child is scholastic. Some are creative. Some are, you know, wonderful with their hands and their ability to build things. And I think in our current school system, that's knocked out of them. I think that is not, it's not, it's not embraced in any way. And I think that's a shame because I think we talk about, the essence of a child in the beginning of the conversation. I think we kind of, you know, intentionally or unintentionally, we kind of take that away in pursuit of what we label as being successful or productive.
Yeah.
I mean, my nephew's really quite successful at what he does. And I just remember, I mean, he was a handy kid. I mean, it was so sweet to watch. And I always think that it skipped me. Like, I'm not handy at all. Like, I didn't get that gene, but my grandfather was. My brothers both are. My nephew is now does, big, security systems and stuff for buildings, like apartment buildings and things like that. When he was like 2 years old, 3 years old. His favorite place in the whole wide world was Home Depot. I mean, he loved Home Depot. I mean, it was like, and I just remember taking him down, and one day we're looking at something and we look down and he's like enamored with all the extension cords, the electrical extension cords, and he's plugging them all together, like all the different ones that were like he's plugging them all together, and he's sitting there and saying, broken. And he's putting them all together. And it was so funny because now he's an electrician. He does a lot of electrical. And I'm like, that was like who he was. It's like, my cousin was a caterer and still does a lot of prepared lunches for schools and things like that. And his son, from the time he could stand, basically loved to cook and loved to stand there in the kitchen with him. And now he's in the business, but it's kind of like, it was like, that was who he was from the time he was like a year or two.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Pretty amazing.
hmm
Pretty amazing. Well, any thoughts to kind of like put a bow on our little chat?
um, no, it was a good conversation. I guess, see if you can find that awe or that childlike wonder
Yep.
in something that's in your normal environment.
Yeah, that's a good game to play, isn't it? Especially when you might be old soon. I'm thinking about that because you and I are not old. In my grandparents' terms, I'm ancient, but no, I love that. The one thing that I will say is I would invite people, to challenge their thinking about the status quo and what's possible. That if there's something that seems like it's wrong or out, do yourself a favor and don't just accept it. Get curious about what the underpinnings are. How does it work? What's going on here? And see whether or not, with your critical thinking and your communication skills, if there's something that you can do to alter its trajectory. Because you know what they say? The Queen Mary, if it moves 1/10 of a degree in the Pacific Ocean, that'll make a difference in the destination of about 300 to 400 miles over a 2,000-mile trip. So it doesn't take an awful lot. It just takes enough people willing to move it just a little bit, in my humble opinion, but your mileage may vary.
Okay.
Would you like to give our invitation?
Sure. So, in the next week, bring to your mind someone who is in your life and just reach out to them. Let them know how much, they matter to you, how important they are. You can do more than one person if you want. You can make a commitment to maybe do a person a day, drop them a text, even a handwritten card. Not that we want to make Bill's wife Janet any busier than she already is, but there's nothing like getting a regular letter in the mail, in my opinion. I love getting regular cards in the mail. That's not bills and not advertisements. So, but just let somebody know that they're special to you and that they matter.
Try it. You'll like it. So with that said, I'm going to remind people who we are, my friend. I'm Bill Correll with Jan Jeremiah, and yes, we certainly are lighting the candle, a world that works, sending all of our love out to you wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whoever you're with. And again, go out and live your best life, and then please come back and tell us all about it. Bye for now, y'all.
Bye-bye, everybody.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.